So, welcome to Whitespace, Data Center Dynamics weekly roundup of news from the data center industry.
Yes, so last week Peter was away at our DCD Enterprise event in New York. Very interesting news from the event coming up. So what was the most interesting thing out there?
Well, it turned out to be Microsoft's underwater data center, which,
Yeah.
I mean, we heard about it earlier in the year. Last year, Microsoft took a single rack and submerged it in 30 foot of water off the coast of America and operated it to the extent where they were running some Azure cloud loads on it. And it all looked like a science experiment.
Yes.
And everybody said, well, that's fine, well done. Nobody's going to do it for real because how are you ever going to get in and upgrade your servers? Putting it at the bottom of the sea may give you free cooling, but there's a lot of other problems involved. No, Ben Cutler from Microsoft, who's been leading the project, came along and gave us lots more details about it and sort of described the benefits and how it fits in and why they did it. And
yes.
There are all sorts of numerous aspects to it, like the fact that it's difficult to get hold of land, but seabed is relatively easy to use, and it's surprisingly uniform, the laws that govern it. As long as you're not out in sort of international waters, they're not trying to avoid taxes. But in the sort of the 12-mile limit of a country's national waters, you can do all sorts of things which you might not get. As long as you look after the environment, you don't sort of destroy coral reefs and things like that. The things they got on the test one were keel coolers, which are existing technology that small boats use to remove the heat of diesel engines inside them. So if you've got a boat with a diesel engine, you've got this kind of bar of metal along the outside, venting the heat to the outside to the water. They've kind of refined that a little bit, but I've got these flexible strands now, which are less likely to be colonised by creatures, so they want to avoid biofouling. At the bottom of the ocean, though, there's less. They did it in 30 foot. The production ones, and there will be production ones. That's the news point here. There will be the next stage. The second stage test is going to happen. Anyway, but way further down you get, the less light there is, the less there is in the way of nutrients. So there's less stuff living further down. So less danger of getting your heat sinks clogged with barnacles. The news point, to me, really, is that this is a sign of the times as far as unattended, lights-out data centers go.
Exactly, because we're sort of like, we talk a lot about this in terms of robots, being inside data centers and managing all the sort of like maintenance, and then you can raise the temperature because at the moment you have to keep it low so people don't get all sweaty.
Yeah, that's right. We've reached a stage where servers can be run more efficiently at higher temperatures than people want to be in. We've also reached a stage where we can see the point where the refresh cycle for hardware is going to extend longer than it actually is. Mm-hmm. So we already have data centers. Microsoft says it has data centers that have no visits for a whole year. If they could extend that to 2 years, and then there's no particular reason why you shouldn't take a larger amount of racks, put them in a slightly larger pressure vessel, sink that down, forget it for 2 years. Talk to it constantly and put cloud loads on it, but leave it there unattended physically but looked after.
Yes.
And then every 2 years you haul it up. And by that stage, whatever technology changes have happened, you've got them all installed in a fresh rack. So you take the old rack out, and replace it with a new one. So it's a sort of a forklift upgrade, shifting the whole lot out and putting a whole new lot in every 2 years or so, or conceivably more. So that's what I saw. There's been chip news, meanwhile, over here, hasn't there?
Yeah, and it's sort of like it's big, impactful political things happening in the world of processors and GPUs. Okay, first of all, Intel last week announced they're going to cut 12,000 jobs. 12?
Whew, that's a big proportion of their whole staff, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And while they're doing that, they're saying they're refocusing their efforts on the processors for servers and for Internet of Things. So they're sort of like they're reducing their involvement with desktops. I mean, the desktop market has been going down for the past 5 years, and the end is nowhere in sight. And the fact is, like, we don't buy as many PCs, and when we buy them, I mean, they last for 5-7 years, and we're not that interested in changing them. And so Intel realized this, and they're just decided to spend their money where it actually matters.
Right. So in other words, they're laying off people because nobody's buying PCs.
So while Intel is doing that, AMD is actually riding high this week. So AMD has been in the dumps for the past couple of years, right? Again, sort of like loss of desktops. I mean, their GPU business has been sort of eaten in by NVIDIA. And
yes, it hasn't, and in the data centers, it was going to take over from Intel. So even in the data centers, it's lost out.
Yes, so it's got a lot of really interesting technology with a lot of potential in progress. It's still being developed. So basically, right now, AMD is trying to buy time. Time is what it needs, and so this last week, it's sort of like it was Thursday. They announced their quarterly results, and they said that they're actually organizing a joint venture with a Chinese company, and this joint venture is going to manufacture server chips for the Chinese market exclusively. And for that, AMD is going to get almost $300 million.
Right.
Plus potential revenues when this thing actually gets underway. I mean, royalties.
Do we know the name of the Chinese company?
Oh, well, it's a typical Tianjin Haijiang Advanced Technology Investment Company.
So it's yet another giant Chinese company that we haven't quite heard of before.
It's not giant, but it is managed by the Chinese Academy of Sciences, and the Chinese Academy of Sciences is the organization which essentially spun off Lenovo back in the day.
Oh, so this is Chinese government money.
Yes.
Sponsoring and helping out a rival to Intel. So there might be ulterior motives going there.
Absolutely, but as long as they're manufactured in China, because I think these are the echoes of these scandals we've had a couple of years ago when it turned out that NSA was actually backdooring hardware, with sort of like physical changes to, I think it was Cisco switches at the factory. A lot of people get paranoid, and everybody said self-reliance. The Russians said we're going to make our own chips, and the Chinese said the same. But they need x86. Not everything can run on ARM. The switch to ARM, if it's going to happen, it's going to take years, and you need a proper traditional computing platform to make all of your stuff run. And this is exactly what these server chips are going to do.
Back in New York, we had some interesting news from Rittal and IBM.
Yes.
Now, they're partners in what is, according to some measures, potentially Europe's largest data centre. That is the giant Lefdal mine. It's a worked out mine in Norway, and the mine having been worked out, and they've dug seams of minerals out of it, and that's left them with these vast open tunnels in a sort of branching structure. They're like streets, and you can drive right in there. You can drive trucks in there, and Rittal intends to do this, to drive trucks carrying data center containers, which can then be plugged into power and cooling. There's cooling from the cold water fjord right next to it, and so Rittal is planning to do this, and they reckon by the time they launch it later this year, they'll have some anchor clients, and they'll have like 10 or 20 containers in there, and space for many hundreds more. They can stack them 3 deep in in a space which is like 1 million square feet. It's huge. They're expecting a big demand for them, partly because of the end of the Safe Harbour Agreement. If it seems strange that they're selling space in a Norwegian mine at a show in New York, it's not strange at all. That the part of the package they're offering is for distressed American businesses that suddenly need data center space in Europe, in which to store the information on their European customers. They're saying, you need to move quick, don't you? We can set you up a data center in 90 days. By you order this container unit, and the containers that they do this with are pre-populated with servers, and so they've gone a little bit beyond the container model so far, as we've seen it, by offering essentially a catalogue of pre-populated data centers. So you can ask for the dense population edition, or the sort of the slightly sparser, the low power, the high power, the HPC, things like that. Yes. And they can, you know what you're getting. It comes with power and cooling integrated, and in 90 days, Rittal will have it on an articulated lorry and take it into the mine for you. We also had Robert Scoble at the New York show, and that's interesting. He's everybody's heard of him. He's the most followed tech journalist on Twitter, and he spent the last few years as entrepreneur in residence at Rackspace.
Yes.
A job from which he's just left to go to another place called Upload VR, and he does cool keynotes in which he rounds up all the most exciting technology he's seen. And there was a nice moment at the end of this one where he says, now a lot of people are freaked by this stuff. He'd kind of rounded up things where demonstrations where you can wear headgear that will track your eye movements so that you can buy online crap simply by twitching your eyes. And he'd had other ones where sharing your data is such a good thing you don't mind the privacy invasion. So, for instance, he was the first person to hear about his plane being cancelled, sitting there on the tarmac. And just because he booked into an online app which tracked where he was and lined it up with air traffic control data. And so he got an alert saying, your plane's cancelled. And he thought, what the hell? I'm on the tarmac. We're taxiing. But he believed it and instantly got online. So they must have been a bit early. Well, it must have been at a point where he was still allowed to use his phone, shall we say. So he got online, booked one of the only 3 tickets out of that city, and was so 20 minutes later, the pilot announced, we found a fault with one of the engines, and everyone else was scrambling for hotel rooms. He was flying out, apparently. But this is his argument being that pervasive surveillance by apps actually gives elite people like him enough of an advantage that they like it. So anyway, but we're all So and he talked about sort of virtual reality, shared over the internet, and all that kind of things, and said, well, most people are freaked by this. That was his word, and he asked for a show of hands, and got very few data center people were freaked by it, because data center people, A, they're well aware this stuff's coming, and B, they know it's good business for them because it all means more data centers.
Absolutely. No, in terms of VR, that's going to need so much bandwidth that it is going to become a data center issue.
Yeah, and one that drives the edge local data center demand and so forth. Okay, and finally, snow. There's a data center in Japan which is cooled in summer by snow.
Yes, 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 and this is very interesting because the way I think about Japan as a country, a tropical country, but it actually stretches pretty far north to south, so they get all the different climate zones. And actually, in the north of the country, yes, you get -30 and proper snowfall.
Yes, like 11 metres of snow falling in the winter, and yet it's still temperate enough that during the summer all that snow melts away. So yeah, so they're covering it with a layer of insulating chips, which will then stop it from melting until summer, when a stream of cold water comes out of the bottom of this heap of snow and can be used to cool the data centre. Well, thank you for joining us. See you next week on White Space.
Bye bye.